Welcome to Doc NYC for the special Q&A for the film Crazy Not Insane. I'm Tom Powers, the festival's artistic director. I'm pleased to have with me the film's director, Alex Gibney, and producer, Ophelia Harutyunyan. I got that right?
Yes.
Sorry if I
That's
botched
okay.
that a little bit. Alex, let me start with you. You've made films about politics and business and sports and music. But the subject of serial killers hasn't really come up in your history before. What drew you to this story?
Interestingly, I was originally sort of steered to this territory because I was approached by Laura Dern, who was interested in doing a drama centering around death row, particularly death row psychiatrists, whose weirdly oxymoronic job is to sometimes determine whether people are sane enough to be executed. And so in doing research for that, and we're still hard at work on that project, but in doing research for that, I came across Dorothy Lewis. She seemed such a fascinating character, and she was approaching this whole subject with the skill and resources of a kind of detective of the mind. And I'm interested a lot in psychology. And so we arranged a meeting. I think it was Joey Mara who first arranged the meeting, and I was just floored by her. She was such an extraordinary person, and also she had this kind of very dark but very funny sense of humor, and that attracted me even more. So we dug in, and Ophelia and I and Joey set off on a mission. It was a long mission.
Ophelia, let me ask you, I mean, this is kind of dark material to live with. Can you talk about what it's like to be in the headspace of this world for months on end?
Yeah, it was actually years. And in the beginning, I mean, obviously during the research period, after reading about a lot of just grisly crimes and seeing photos and doing the archival research, I was having nightmares, and then they were getting very vivid. I did get used to the subject at some point, which made me question the whole idea.
Is that
of
a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, so it was tricky, and I was actually fascinated because here I was, reading about all of this and just being disturbed. And Dorothy had spent her entire life working with these people, and directly, physically being in the same room with them and just trying to understand why they did what they did. I was really fascinated, and I bow to her for being able to do this, because it's definitely not easy.
Yeah. Alex, I remember a few years ago, after you made your film about Elliot Spitzer, Client 9, you were describing to me that even though lots of your films about political or business corruption feel like institutional corruption on the outside, that you were becoming more and more fascinated in these stories about the human psychology of people at the center, whether it's Elliot Spitzer or Lance Armstrong or Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos. Can you talk about your interest in human psychology in these films and exploring that and how it relates to this exploration?
Sure. I mean, I kind of stumbled into it in a way. It actually started on Enron, and we stumbled on an article about Enron in which somebody related what happened to Enron with what happened in the Milgram experiment, the famous experiment by Professor Stanley Milgram at Yale, where he was trying to understand obedience. Essentially, it was an experiment meant to understand why good Germans could do such horrific things, and what ultimately led to the Holocaust. So that set me off, and it was really the psychology of perps. And so for something like this, and over time, I mean, whether it be Elliot Spitzer, Lance Armstrong, Elizabeth Holmes, I've very much been interested in that idea. Sometimes going down the road of this notion of noble cause corruption, how people, when they think they're doing something good, can end up doing terrible things because they think that the end justifies the means. But in this case, this was getting into the minds and the psychology of serial killers or ruthless murderers, or murderers who who committed horrible acts. And that led me to a very unexpected place, which was, what happens in our childhood. And that's where Dorothy had, in looking at the most extreme behavior of these ruthless serial killers, she found a place to explore that is common to all of us, which is, how does what happens to us in childhood affect the way we turn out as adults?
Ophelia, I'm curious, what you think audiences should take away from the life work of Dorothy Lewis.
I think understanding the legacy that she, is leaving behind, and the groundbreaking work that she did. I mean, before she started working, she kind of found herself in this work kind of randomly. She was not working with death row cases, and one a defense attorney actually found her after hearing her talk about child psychiatry on TV, and she kind of stumbled in this world of death row cases. But she really changed the way lawyers, attorneys look at a case these days. Before her, they wouldn't really look into the family history. They wouldn't really go and talk to friends and parents and try to understand what kind of a person they were when they were a child. And she kind of completely changed how they look at a case now. And she's been a pioneer. But on a general note, I would hope that we can kind of look at our, kind of look back and reflect and just see how we as a society enable these behaviors, and how can we prevent. I think what Dorothy has been trying to preach is that there's a way to prevent this behavior. She's been trying to understand why people kill so that we can prevent that. I think going from, instead of trying to lock people up and giving up on them as a society and saying, okay, this person is damaged goods, how can we fix this person, but also make sure that this doesn't happen again, that another person doesn't do this. So trying to understand what causes these behaviors, what can we do as a society to prevent them, and how can we help people who have found themselves in these situations, and not just simply give up on them.
Tom, if I could follow up on that just super quick, the other kind of killing that I think Dorothy is suggesting we need to prevent is the death penalty. And, the idea that she would kill insane people who may not be capable of stopping themselves seems pretty crazy, if not insane. But in addition, we now know pretty convincingly that actually the death penalty has no preventative effect. In fact, in states where the death penalty exists, homicide rates are higher than in states that don't have the death penalty. So if actually by using the death penalty, by killing people, by the state killing people, we actually make it more likely that homicides will occur, then what in the hell are we doing with a death penalty? Is this some kind of political manipulation of the need for revenge rather than something very positive that's supposed to, administer justice?
Speaking as a documentary festival programmer, we get a lot of films about serial killers, and I'm often troubled by the way stories about serial killers are packaged, and certain serial killers almost get turned into celebrities, like a Ted Bundy. And I wonder how you grappled with that, dealing with these stories, but not somehow perversely glamorizing them.
We did grapple with that throughout the filmmaking process, and particularly in the editing room. On the one hand, recognize that there is a kind of sensationalistic appeal to murders and murderers, and if there wasn't, we wouldn't keep making movies about them. At the same time, it was the ability to go deeper into that territory and to really understand not so much the what happened, and that's the sensationalized stuff. Was it a knife or a razor blade or a gun? But why did it happen? And that is the stuff that Dorothy is really interested in. And weirdly, that's what brought Ted Bundy to want to see her not too long before he died. He was interested, he was executed. He was interested in talking to her about the why, not the what.
I think we also, I mean, if you remember, each case starts with the crime and actually showing the gruesome kind of pictures and just reminding people that this is what the person did. Yes, we're asking you to understand why they did it, but also as a reminder, this is what they did. So in order to make sure that we don't forget that there were victims, people died. I mean, we cannot obviously change the fact, and we're not trying to justify or sympathize in any way, but trying to understand why this happened.
Alex, as I finish up here, you talked about some of the takeaways from this film as it might apply to the way we think about the death penalty. I wonder if there are other applications to the criminal justice system that you see in the work of Dorothy Lewis.
I do. I mean, I think that it made me rethink the idea of the criminal justice system and how sometimes in the search for justice, in the mechanism of that search, are appeals for revenge that become political and actually hugely damaging to the case of justice itself. So that was a real insight for me, that the process of administering justice can very quickly and easily turn, if we're not careful, into a search for revenge, which is not where we want to go.
You both also worked this year on the film Totally Under Control about the US response to COVID-19. And you must have spent a lot of time thinking about the psychology of Donald Trump, and maybe dissociative identity disorder doesn't apply here. But I wonder if, this plunge into thinking about human psychology, applied to your study of U.S. politicians during the time of the pandemic.
I wish Dorothy could study Donald Trump. I think that would have been fun, because we still have unanswered questions.
I agree, though I think, and Dorothy would probably say it's pretty dangerous to diagnose somebody from afar. But when you look at the relentless lack of empathy and the willingness to sacrifice so many lives for personal aggrandizement, it's not too hard to, as an amateur, to diagnose sociopathic tendencies. So I don't think I don't think I'm saying anything new, but it seems pretty apparent. If you're willing to sacrifice 200,000 people or more for political ends, it's a pretty shocking. It's pretty shocking.
Yeah, I think the idea of dissociation, right, being able to justify that or detach yourself from the crime, right? Okay, those 200,000 lives that have been lost are not my fault. I have nothing to do with that. I think that is definitely something that is interesting, because we've learned from Dorothy that as humans we tend to do that. Some people can take it to a certain extremes, obviously.
But here's the thing about Trump. See, we now know from Woodward that on February 7th, at the very least, before any Americans had died, he knew how deadly was the virus. And yet he intentionally soft-pedaled it, making it all the more likely that people would die. That is really disturbing psychology.
Well, thank you both for both of these films this year, Crazy Not Insane and Totally Under Control. I look forward to audiences getting to see them. For those watching, I should let you know this film will be coming to HBO, so spread the word and tell your friends. Ophelia and Alex, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you.
Always a pleasure.